He was an orphan of the state, aged out of the system with nothing but a worn-out bag and a strange inheritance. They told him he owned a moving stone door in a cave, and what he discovered behind it would change not just his life, but the very meaning of the word. If you've ever felt like you were starting from zero, with nothing but a key to a door you couldn't find, then this story is for you. Stick with me, and maybe share your own story in the comments below. I promise, I read every single one. The day I turned 18, the world didn't celebrate with me. There was no cake, no party, just a cardboard box containing everything I owned, and a final, formal handshake from Mrs. Gable, the director of the Northwood Children's Home. Her hand was dry, her grip brief. It was a transaction. 18 years of my life, a ward of the state, concluded in a beige hallway that smelled of industrial cleaner and quiet desperation. "Leo," she said, her voice as starched as her blouse, "the state's obligation to you is now fulfilled. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." Future endeavors. It sounded like something you'd say to a fired employee. I clutched the box, the corners digging into my palms. Inside were 2 pairs of jeans, a few faded t-shirts, a worn copy of a book about constellations my 3rd grade teacher gave me, and a toothbrush. That was the sum total of my existence. I nodded, because that's what you did at Northwood. You nodded, you kept your head down, you made yourself small and unobtrusive until you ceased to exist in their administrative reality. I had become an expert at it. The front doors of the institution hissed open, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times, but never from me. The air that hit my face was cold, sharp with the promise of a late autumn rain. It felt foreign, unregulated. For 18 years, my air had been filtered, heated, and controlled. This air was wild. I took a step onto the cracked concrete path, and for the first time there was no one to tell me to come back inside. The freedom was so vast it felt like a physical weight, a pressure on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I was completely, terrifyingly alone. My only plan was to walk to the downtown bus station and use the $75 of transition funds the state had provided to go somewhere, anywhere that wasn't here. But before I could take a second step, a tired-looking sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, and a man I vaguely recognized leaned over. Mr. Henderson, my caseworker. I'd seen him maybe 4 times in the last 10 years. A recurring ghost in an ill-fitting suit who brought forms to be signed and bad news to be delivered. "Leo, wait up," he called out, his voice gravelly. "Got one last piece of business for you." I stopped, my shoulders tensing. Last pieces of business were never good. They were usually about a failed foster placement or a budget cut to some program I was in. He got out of the car, holding a thick manila envelope. He looked older than I remembered, his face a roadmap of exhaustion. "This came for you," he said, handing me the envelope. "It's from the probate court. Pertains to your grandfather's estate." My grandfather. The words sounded strange. I had no family. That was the first and most important fact of my life. My file said, "Parents deceased, no known relatives." "I don't have a grandfather," I said, my voice flat. Mr. Henderson sighed, a long, weary sound. "According to the state, you do. Or you did. He passed away about 6 months ago. Lived way out in the sticks, off the grid mostly. It took them this long to track you down as his next of kin." He gestured for me to get in the car. Let's go to the office. It's too cold to handle legal matters on a sidewalk. The drive was silent. His car smelled like stale coffee and paperwork. It was the official smell of my childhood. At the county services building, he led me to a small, windowless room with a metal table and 2 plastic chairs. The air hummed with the buzz of a fluorescent light overhead. He opened the envelope and slid a stack of papers across the table. I'm not a lawyer, Leo, so I can only give you the gist. Your grandfather, a Mr. Elias Vance, left you everything he owned. My heart gave a stupid, hopeful little flutter. Everything he owned. For a second, I let myself imagine a small house, a savings account, a lifeline. Mr. Henderson must have seen the look on my face because his own expression softened with something like pity. Now don't get your hopes up, son. From the looks of it, everything he owned isn't much. He had no money, no bank accounts they could find. What he did have was a piece of land, 10 acres of undeveloped timberland up in the Cinderwood Mountains. He pushed a deed forward. My name was typed on it, Leo Vance. I had never seen my last name on an official document that wasn't a case file. There's a catch, he continued, tapping a paragraph with his finger. The property is listed as having no structures of value. No house, no cabin, no well. Just trees and rock. And according to this addendum he filed with his will, the sole point of interest is, and I quote, the functional, counterweighted, moving stone door located at the mouth of the primary cave system on the northern ridge. I stared at him. A moving stone door? In a cave? That's what it says, he shrugged, a gesture of bureaucratic helplessness. The lawyer who filed this said your grandfather was eccentric. He insisted that phrase be included. So, congratulations, Leo. You've just inherited a rock. The tiny spark of hope in my chest fizzled out, leaving a cold, familiar ash. Of course, this was my inheritance. A cosmic joke. A piece of useless, remote land and a weird door. It was perfectly in line with the rest of my life. It was nothing. Less than nothing, because now this nothing had a name and a deed, making its emptiness official. There's also this, Mr. Henderson said, pulling a smaller envelope from the back of the file. It was old, the paper yellowed and soft at the edges. My name was written on the front in a shaky, spidery script. He left a personal letter for you. The lawyer was instructed to release it only after you turned 18 and took possession of the deed. He pushed it toward me. I didn't reach for it. I felt a surge of anger, hot and bitter. A grandfather I never knew existed, who never once tried to find me, leaves me a rock and a letter? After 18 years of silence? What am I supposed to do with this? I asked, my voice tight. I gestured at the papers, the whole ridiculous situation. I have $75 and a bus ticket to nowhere. I can't eat a cave. Mr. Henderson leaned back, the plastic chair creaking in protest. Look, son, I know this is weird and probably disappointing, but it's yours. The property taxes are paid up for the next 5 years. It's a place that belongs to you. That's more than a lot of kids have when they walk out those doors. He was trying to be kind, but his words felt hollow. A place that belonged to me. The concept was so alien, I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I had only ever belonged to the system, a line item in a budget, a name on a list. The idea of owning something, even a worthless patch of dirt, felt like a language I didn't speak. He saw I wasn't convinced. "There's one more thing, a standing offer." He pulled out another, more modern-looking business envelope. "A timber company, West Tech Development, has been trying to buy that land for years. Your grandfather always refused. They've already contacted the estate's lawyer. They're offering $10,000 for the 10 acres, as is." $10,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering. To me, it was a fortune. It was a security deposit on an apartment. It was food for a year. It was a new life, a real start, handed to me on a silver platter. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper and walk away from the joke inheritance, the ghost of a grandfather, the moving stone door. It was the smart move, the logical move. "The offer is good for 30 days, Mr. Henderson said, watching me. "The lawyer's contact information is in there. You call him, you sign, they wire the money. It's the easiest 10 grand you'll ever make." I looked down at the 2 envelopes on the table. One held a fortune, a clean break. The other held a letter from a dead man and a mystery about a stone door. Every rational part of my brain, every survival instinct, honed by years of institutional life, screamed at me to take the money. Don't be a fool. Don't chase ghosts. Survive. But something else, a quiet, stubborn thing I didn't know I possessed, hesitated. My entire life had been chosen for me. My meals, my clothes, my home, my future, or lack thereof. This was the first real choice I'd ever had. And one option was the same as the life I'd always known, a transaction, an exchange of something I didn't understand for something I needed. The other option was unknown. It was a story I hadn't read yet. I picked up the old yellowed envelope. The paper was thin, almost translucent. I could feel the folded letter inside, a faint series of ridges against my thumb. "What's the bus route to a place called Cinderwood?" I asked. Mr. Henderson looked at me for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Surprise? Respect? Then he nodded slowly. "There's one. Leaves at 4 p.m. It'll get you to a town called Harmony Creek. From there, your land is another 10 miles up the mountain road. You'll have to walk." He paused. "Are you sure about this, Leo? It's rough country. There's nothing out there." I clutched the letter. "For the first time in my life," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "there might be something." The bus ride was 8 hours of watching the world transform. The city's dense grid of concrete and glass gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to flat, predictable farmland. The neat rows of crops stretched for miles, a landscape as ordered and monotonous as the hallways of Northwood. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. The vibration of the engine, a constant hum that worked its way into my bones. For the first few hours, I just watched the world slide by, feeling a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. I hadn't opened the letter yet. It sat in the inside pocket of my thin jacket, a warm, heavy square against my chest. I was afraid of it, afraid of what it would say, and more afraid of what it wouldn't. What could a man who abandoned me to the system possibly have to say that would matter now? The $10,000 offer felt like a constant whisper in my ear, a siren song of safety and simplicity. I could get off at the next major city, find a cheap motel, call the lawyer, and be done with it. I could buy a new life. But what kind of life would it be? It would be another version of the one I'd just left, anonymous, rootless, built on a foundation of nothing. At least the land, the cave, the ridiculous stone door. It was a story. It was my story, whether I liked it or not. As the sun began to set, the bus turned off the main highway and began to climb. The landscape changed again. The flat fields disappeared, replaced by rolling hills that soon swelled into the dark, imposing shapes of mountains. The trees grew thicker, taller, crowding the road. We were entering the Cinderwood Range. The air inside the bus felt stuffy, recycled. I cracked the window open an inch, and the air that rushed in was completely different. It was cold and clean and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It smelled ancient and wild. It was the kind of air that had never been inside a building. For the first time all day, I felt a flicker of something other than anxiety or numbness. It was a strange, sharp feeling. Not quite excitement, but a kind of intense curiosity. What kind of person chose to live out here, away from everything? What kind of man was my grandfather? The bus was mostly empty now. An old woman with a wicker basket got off in a small town that was little more than a gas station and a general store. A young man with a backpack and hiking boots got off at a trailhead. Finally, it was just me and the driver. The road grew narrower, winding its way up the mountain in a series of sharp switchbacks. The sun had set, and the world outside was a deep, velvety black, broken only by the sweep of the bus's headlights across the dense forest. "Harmony Creek, next stop," the driver called out, his voice echoing in the empty bus. "End of the line." The bus slowed, pulling into a small gravel lot in front of a single building with a flickering sign that read, "Harmony Creek General Store." The engine idled for a moment, and then, with a hydraulic sigh, the doors opened. This was it. I grabbed my box and my bag. "Thanks," I said to the driver. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "You be careful up here, son. This mountain doesn't care if you're 18 or 80. You get lost, you stay lost." With that cheerful piece of advice, I stepped off the bus and into the profound darkness and silence of the mountains. The bus pulled away, its red taillights shrinking into the distance until they were swallowed by the trees. And then the silence that descended was absolute. It was a living thing, a pressure against my eardrums. There were no sirens, no traffic, no hum of a building's HVAC system. There was only the whisper of the wind in the tops of the colossal pine trees and the frantic beating of my own heart. The air was bitingly cold. I could see my breath pluming in front of me. The general store was closed, a single dim light glowing from a back window. Across the road there was a small post office and a building with a sign that said, "Tavern." Both were dark. I was utterly alone. According to the map Mr. Henderson had printed for me, the property line was about 10 miles up the single-lane road that continued past the store. 10 miles, walking, in the dark. I felt a surge of despair, so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. What was I thinking? This was insane. I should have taken the money. I could be in a warm motel room right now, ordering a pizza, planning my new $10,000 life. Instead, I was standing in the middle of nowhere with a box of worthless possessions, facing a 10-mile hike into a wilderness I knew nothing about. I sank down onto the wooden porch steps of the general store, burying my face in my hands. The cold from the wood seeped through my thin jeans. I felt the familiar sting of tears behind my eyes, the hot shame of my own powerlessness. This was just another dead end, another institutional gray wall, just made of trees this time. I sat there for a long time, shivering, letting the self-pity wash over me. But then, the stubborn little thing inside me stirred again. It was a flicker of defiance that had kept me going through 18 years of being a number. I had come this far. I had chosen this. I wasn't going to be beaten by a dark road. I stood up, squared my shoulders, and looked up. And I gasped. Above me, the sky was a riot of stars. Without the city's light pollution, the Milky Way was a brilliant, shimmering slash across the darkness. It was more stars than I had ever seen in my life. I saw constellations I only knew from the tattered book in my box. Cassiopeia, Ursa Major, Cygnus. They felt like old friends. It was a beauty so vast and overwhelming, it made my own problems feel small, temporary. The mountain might not care about me, as the bus driver said, but this sky felt like a promise. It felt like a map to somewhere new. I took a deep breath of the cold, clean air, hoisted my box, and started walking up the road. The first few miles were the hardest. The road was steep and uneven, my city-worn sneakers slipping on loose gravel. My arms ached from the weight of the box. Every rustle in the woods beside the road sounded like a predator. My imagination, fed by years of institutional boredom, conjured bears and mountain lions behind every tree. But after an hour, a rhythm took hold. The rhythm of my footsteps, my breathing, the steady, silent march under the canopy of stars. My fear subsided, replaced by a kind of weary focus. I wasn't thinking about the past or the future anymore. I was just thinking about the next step, and the one after that. The map showed a small, overgrown service path branching off the main road near a distinctive rock formation that looked like a wolf's head. After what felt like an eternity of walking, my phone's flashlight, which I was using sparingly, caught the shape in the darkness. It was unmistakable. A massive granite outcrop, weathered by centuries of wind and rain into a snarling lupine profile. This was the turnoff. The path was barely a path at all, more like a suggestion of a trail, choked with weeds and fallen branches. Pushing through the undergrowth felt like I was breaking a seal, entering a place that had been left undisturbed for a very long time. The air grew even colder, the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves more intense. After another 20 minutes of struggling through the brush, the path opened into a small, natural clearing. And there, at the far end of the clearing, was the reason I had come all this way. A sheer cliff face rose up from the forest floor, and set into its base was a perfect, dark circle, the entrance to a cave. I walked toward it, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The entrance was about 10 feet high, a smooth, almost unnaturally round opening in the rock. And just inside, shrouded in shadow, was the door. It wasn't what I had imagined. I had pictured something rough, a boulder rolled into place. This was different. It was a massive circular slab of what looked like polished black granite, fitting the opening almost perfectly. It didn't look like a rock. It looked like a piece of architecture. There were no visible handles, no hinges, no seams. It was just a solid, silent disk of stone. I pushed against it. Nothing. It was like pushing against the mountain itself. I ran my hands over its surface. It was cool and impossibly smooth. How could this possibly move? Was this the whole joke? An immovable rock that my eccentric grandfather had called a door? I felt a fresh wave of disappointment. I had walked all this way for a piece of public art in the middle of the woods. I kicked at its base in frustration, my sneaker making a dull thud. And then I saw it. At the very bottom, almost completely hidden by moss and dirt, was a small, square indentation, no bigger than my thumb. I knelt down, scraping away the grime. It was a keyhole, a modern, metallic keyhole, set incongruously into the ancient stone. It was a lock. A jolt went through me. A lock meant there was a key. A lock meant it was designed to be opened. I fumbled in my pocket for the small, standard-looking key that had been clipped to the deed. I had assumed it was for a post office box or a shed that had long since rotted away. My hand was shaking as I inserted it into the lock. It fit perfectly. I turned it. There was a loud, satisfying click that echoed in the silent clearing. For a moment, nothing happened. I held my breath. Then, with a low, deep groan of grinding stone, the massive slab began to move. It didn't swing open. It retracted, sliding sideways into a hidden recess within the cliff face, as smooth and silent as a modern elevator door. The movement was slow, majestic, and utterly impossible. It was a moving stone door. He hadn't been crazy. The opening revealed a passage, dark and absolute. A cold draft, smelling of stone and deep earth, flowed out to meet me. I stood frozen at the threshold, staring into the darkness. I had come all this way on a fool's errand, chasing a ridiculous story. And the story was true. I took a hesitant step inside, my sneakers crunching on the gravel floor. The air was still and cold. My phone's flashlight cut a weak beam into the oppressive darkness, revealing a wide, smooth-walled tunnel that sloped gently downward. The stone door slid shut behind me with the same deep groan, sealing me inside. For a terrifying second, panic seized me. I was trapped. But then I saw a soft glow from deeper within the cave. It was a warm, yellow light, flickering and unsteady. It was a lantern. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the vast space. The tunnel opened into a large, circular chamber with a high, vaulted ceiling. In the center of the chamber was a simple wooden table and a chair. On the table, an old-fashioned oil lantern was burning, its flame casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Next to the lantern was a thick, leather-bound journal and a single, sealed envelope. The same spidery handwriting from the first letter was on the front. It just said, Leo. This was it. This was the place he had prepared for me. This was where the answers were. I pulled out the chair, the sound of its legs scraping on the stone floor seeming impossibly loud. I sat down, my hands trembling slightly, and picked up the envelope. I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. My dearest Leo, it began. If you are reading this, then you have made a choice. You chose the mystery over the money. You chose the hard road over the easy one. That tells me more about you than 18 years of separation ever could. It tells me you are my grandson. It tells me you are ready to hear the truth. I stopped reading, my throat tight. The words were so direct, so personal. It felt like he was in the room with me. I took a shaky breath and continued. The journal on this table contains the whole story. But before you read it, I need you to understand a few things. First, I am sorry. I am sorry for the life you have had. I am sorry I was not there. It was not because I did not love you. It was because loving you meant letting you go. My world was no place for a child. I was a different man back then, a man caught up in dangerous things. The people I was involved with, they would have used you to get to me. The state, for all its faults, was the safest place I could put you. It was a cold comfort, but it was the only one I had to give. A lie to keep you safe. Second, this place, This cave is not an inheritance. It is a choice. You can read my story, take what I have left for you, and walk away. Or you can stay. You can accept the legacy I am offering. The choice is yours, and yours alone. Whatever you decide, know this. I have thought of you every day of my life. I have followed your progress from a distance, through letters from a sympathetic contact I had in the system. I know about your love of stars. I know you are quiet but strong. I know you are a good person who has been given a hard life. I hope what you find here can make up for some of it. Your grandfather, Elias. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through the tears that had finally started to fall. I cried for the little boy who had waited for a family that never came. I cried for the old man who had spent his life alone in the mountains, watching his grandson from afar. And I cried for the anger and resentment I had carried for so long, which was now being replaced by a confusing mix of grief and a fragile, tentative understanding. It wasn't abandonment. It was protection. A strange, harsh, and lonely kind of love. After a long time, I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and reached for the leather-bound journal. It was heavy, the pages filled with the same dense, slightly shaky handwriting. I opened it to the first page. The date was from 20 years ago, just after I was born. My daughter is gone, it began, and they are responsible. I have her son now, my grandson, Leo. He is all I have left of her. But I know they will come looking for him. They will not stop. I cannot keep him with me. To keep him is to condemn him. I have to hide him in plain sight, in the one place they will never think to look, the system they despise. I will erase myself, become a ghost, and I will build him a sanctuary, a place for him to come home to when he is old enough to understand, a place they can never touch. I read for hours, my phone's light supplementing the warm glow of the lantern. The story that unfolded in those pages was more incredible and more tragic than anything I could have ever imagined. My grandfather, Elias, hadn't always been a recluse. In his younger days, he had been a brilliant engineer, a specialist in geology and structural mechanics. He had worked on classified government projects, designing secure, underground facilities. My mother, his only child, had been a journalist. She was bright and fearless, and she had uncovered a massive criminal conspiracy involving a powerful, untouchable corporation that was laundering money through illegal resource extraction. They were dangerous people. According to the journal, they had arranged an accident that killed both her and my father. Elias was sure of it, but he had no proof he could take to the authorities, because the corporation had people everywhere. He knew they would come for me next, the only loose end. So he disappeared. He used his knowledge to create this place, a fortress hidden inside a mountain. He cashed out his life savings, converted it to untraceable assets, and built his sanctuary. The moving stone door wasn't magic. It was a masterpiece of engineering. He had spent years designing and building the counterweight system, using the mountain's own geology to create a perfectly balanced, silent mechanism that required only the turn of a key to activate. He lived out his life as a hermit, guarding his secret, making sure the trail to me went cold. He wrote about his loneliness, his guilt, his unending love for the daughter he had lost and the grandson he could never know. He detailed every step of building the cave system, not just this antechamber, but the network of tunnels and rooms that lay beyond. He had installed a ventilation system, tapped into a deep underground spring for fresh water, and even set up a small hydroelectric generator using the flow of the spring. It was a completely self-sufficient world, hidden inside a mountain. As I read, my anger at him melted away completely, replaced by a profound sense of awe and a deep, aching sadness. He hadn't given me nothing. He had given me everything. He had spent the last 20 years of his life building me a home, a fortress, a legacy of protection. The journal ended a few months before his death. The last entry was short. The cancer is winning. I don't have much time. I have set everything in motion. The deed, the letter, the lawyer. It's all in place. Soon it will be up to him. I hope he chooses the stars. I hope he chooses to come home. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. The lantern was beginning to flicker, the oil running low. I knew I needed to sleep, but my brain was on fire. I stood up and walked deeper into the cave, following a passage that led from the main chamber. The passage opened into another, much larger cavern. It took my breath away. This was where he had lived. There was a simple bed built into an alcove in the rock. A small, efficient-looking wood stove with a neat stack of firewood beside it. Shelves carved into the stone walls were filled with books, engineering texts, classic literature, poetry, and a whole section on astronomy. There was a workbench covered in tools and half-finished projects, and against the far wall there was a large metal locker. It was locked with a simple combination lock. I thought back to the journal. He had mentioned my love of the stars. I remembered the date my third-grade teacher had given me the book on constellations. I walked over to the lock and dialed in the numbers. My birthday. The lock clicked open. I swung the heavy door open, and my phone's light fell upon the contents. My heart stopped. The locker was filled with cash, neat plastic-wrapped bundles of $100 bills, and on top of the money was a small velvet bag. I opened it and poured the contents into my hand. Gold coins, dozens of them. A piece of paper was tucked into the door of the locker. "This is what's left," the note read, "from the sale of my patents and my old life. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough for you to live, to study, to build a life. Or enough to protect this place. The choice, as always, is yours." I slid down to the floor, my back against the cold stone wall, the money and gold forgotten. He had given me a home, a history, and a future. But he had also given me a burden. The people who had killed my parents, the corporation, were they still out there? Was the danger still real? The journal didn't say. He seemed to believe that after 20 years the trail was cold, that they had forgotten. But the fear he had lived with for so long now felt like it had been transferred to me. I spent the next few days in a daze, exploring the world my grandfather had built. The cave system was a marvel. There was a pantry stocked with years' worth of non-perishable food, a bathroom with running water from the spring, heated by a clever system that used compost. There was a small greenhouse in a cavern where a natural fissure in the rock overhead let in a sliver of sunlight, filled with pots of herbs and vegetables. He had thought of everything. It was a self-contained universe, a monument to one man's grief and love. I found his maps of the property, detailed geological surveys, and blueprints for the door mechanism. I found his personal effects, a photograph of a beautiful young woman with my eyes, my mother, a framed patent for some kind of advanced drilling equipment, a collection of rocks and minerals from the surrounding mountains. I was piecing together the life of a man I had never met, and in doing so, I was piecing together my own. But the outside world couldn't be ignored forever. On the third day, I knew I had to go back to Harmony Creek. My phone was dead, my supplies were low, and I needed to think, away from the overwhelming presence of the cave. I also needed to check the post office. Elias's journal mentioned he had a P.O. box there under his own name, which he had arranged to be transferred to me along with the deed. The walk back down the mountain in the daylight was completely different. I could see the beauty of the place, the towering trees, the glimpses of the valley below through gaps in the foliage. It was still wild and intimidating, but it no longer felt hostile. It felt like mine. Harmony Creek wasn't much bigger in the daylight. The general store was open, run by a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile named Sarah. I bought a cheap solar charger for my phone, a fresh loaf of bread, some cheese, and a coffee that tasted like heaven. She was curious, but polite enough not to ask too many questions about the kid who had appeared out of the woods. At the post office, a small, dusty building run by a gruff man who seemed annoyed to have a customer, there was a stack of mail waiting for me in the box. Mostly junk mail addressed to Elias Vance. But at the bottom was a crisp, professional-looking envelope. It was from West Tech Development. My stomach clenched. I had almost forgotten about them. I sat on the porch of the general store and opened it. The letter was polite, professional, and predatory. It referenced their previous offer of $10,000. It went on to say that, as a gesture of goodwill to the new owner, they were prepared to increase their offer to $15,000. A whole paragraph talked about the land being unsuitable for residential use, lacking basic utilities, and being a significant tax liability. It was a sales pitch, designed to make me feel like they were doing me a favor by taking this useless burden off my hands. $15,000. It was an even more tempting siren song than before. With the money in the locker, I didn't need it for survival, but it was still a lot of money. It was the easy way out. I could take it, take the money from the locker, and disappear. I could go to college, get a degree, live a normal life. No one would ever know about the cave, about my grandfather's story. I could leave the ghosts of the past behind me. But could I? My grandfather had spent his life building this place for me. He had died believing it was a sanctuary. Selling it to a faceless corporation felt like a betrayal. It felt like spitting on his grave. And what would they do with it? The letter mentioned timber, but the journal had contained Elias's geological surveys. He had discovered a massive, untapped deposit of rare earth minerals deep under the mountain. That's what they were really after. They would strip mine it. They would tear the mountain apart, destroy the forest, and obliterate the cave and everything inside it. My home, my history, all of it, gone for $15,000. The choice he had written about in his letter was no longer abstract. It was right here, in my hands. The easy money versus the hard legacy. I sat there for a long time, watching the few cars that passed through the tiny town. I thought about the beige hallways of Northwood. I thought about the 18 years of feeling like I had no story, no past, no one. This place, this cave, this mountain, it was the first thing that had ever truly been mine. It wasn't just land, it was an identity. I folded the letter, stood up, and walked back into the general store. "Do you sell envelopes and stamps?" I asked Sarah. I wrote a very short, very simple reply to West Tech Development. "Thank you for your offer," it said. "The property is not for sale." I dropped it in the mail slot at the post office. The sound of the envelope hitting the bottom of the box felt like a declaration of war. It also felt like the first truly adult decision I had ever made. I was choosing the hard road. I was choosing to stay. Walking back up the mountain this time, I felt different. The weariness was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. This wasn't just a visit anymore. I was walking home. When I reached the clearing, I didn't hesitate. I used the key, and the great stone door slid open to welcome me. The air inside no longer felt cold and alien. It felt like a familiar embrace. I had made my choice. I was going to protect this place. I was going to honor the man who had built it for me. The next few months were the hardest and best of my life. I learned how to be self-sufficient. I read my grandfather's books, learning about the generator, the water system, the delicate ecosystem of the greenhouse. I learned how to chop wood, how to maintain the stove, how to live by the rhythms of the sun and the seasons instead of the bells of an institution. I spent hours in the workshop, finishing some of his projects, learning how to work with my hands. I felt a connection to him in those moments, as if he were standing over my shoulder, guiding me. I made weekly trips to town for supplies I couldn't produce myself. My relationship with Sarah at the store grew from polite nods to quiet conversations. She told me about her life in the town, and I, without giving away my secrets, told her a little about mine. I told her I was fixing up an old family property. She started saving me day-old bread. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a thread of connection to the community, the first I'd ever had. The response from West Tech was predictable. A few weeks after I mailed my letter, another one arrived. The tone was colder. It spoke of eminent domain, of zoning laws. It was a veiled threat. A few weeks after that, a man in a suit showed up in a clean black SUV while I was in town. He introduced himself as a representative from the company. He was smooth and professional, and he doubled their offer, $25,000. When I refused, his smile tightened. "You're making a mistake, kid," he said. "That mountain is worth more to us than it will ever be to you." I just looked at him. "You're wrong," I said, and walked away. That was when I knew I couldn't just hide. I had to fight. I used some of the money my grandfather had left to buy a laptop and a satellite internet hookup. I spent my nights not just looking at the stars, but studying. I learned about environmental law. I read about West Tech, discovering a long history of shady dealings, of cutting corners, of environmental violations they had paid fines to make go away. They were exactly the kind of people my mother had tried to expose. The fight wasn't just for my land anymore. It was for her, too. I started a blog, anonymously at first. I wrote about the Cinderwood Mountains, about the unique ecosystem, the rare plants my grandfather had cataloged in his journals. I wrote about the threat of strip mining. I used my grandfather's geological surveys to show what was at stake. I didn't mention the cave or my personal history. I just framed it as a concerned citizen trying to protect a piece of wilderness. People started to notice. Local environmental groups shared my posts. The Harmony Creek community, small as it was, began to murmur. They were mountain people. They didn't like outsiders, especially corporate ones, telling them what to do. Sarah started a petition in the general store. The gruff postmaster signed it. The fight was slow, a war of attrition fought with emails and zoning board meetings and community flyers. West Tech had money and lawyers, but we had the truth. We had the home field advantage, and I had a secret weapon, my grandfather's legacy. He had left me not just a fortress, but an arsenal of information. One night, digging through a box of his old research papers, I found it. A file labeled WT Contingency. It was his opposition research. He had never stopped watching them. The file contained proof of bribery, of falsified environmental reports, of a cover-up related to a toxic spill at one of their other sites years ago. It was the kind of thing my mother would have died for. And maybe she had. I took a deep breath and published it all. The fallout was immediate. State investigators got involved. The media picked up the story. West Tech's stock plummeted. They withdrew their offer and their zoning applications. They were too busy trying to save their company to worry about one stubborn kid on a mountain. We had won. I stood in the clearing one evening, watching the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was crisp and cool. The wind whispered through the pines. For 18 years, home had been a place I'd dreamed of, but could never picture. It was a vague, formless ache in my chest. Now I knew what it looked like. It looked like this. It smelled like pine and damp earth. It sounded like the wind and the silence. Home wasn't a building. It was a choice. It was a fight. It was a story you decided to be a part of. My grandfather had given me a sanctuary, but he had also given me a purpose. He had taught me that an inheritance isn't just something you are given. It's something you choose to accept and defend. It's the legacy you decide to carry forward. I still live here. The stone door still opens with the turn of a key, a silent testament to a father's love for his daughter, and a grandfather's love for a boy he never met. I haven't touched the bulk of the money he left me. I don't need it. I have everything I need right here. Sometimes at night, I take my grandfather's telescope out into the clearing, and I look at the stars. I think about him, and my parents, and the strange, hard path that brought me here. And I feel a sense of peace that I never thought was possible. I am not a ward of the state. I am not a case file number. I am Leo Vance, and this is my home. This whole journey taught me that sometimes the things that look like burdens are actually gifts. The strange inheritances, the difficult pasts, the overgrown paths. Sometimes they lead to the only place you were ever meant to be. It's about having the courage to turn the key and see what's on the other side of the door. So I want to ask you, have you ever been given something that seemed worthless at first, but turned out to be the key to everything? It doesn't have to be a cave in a mountain. It could be a piece of advice, a second chance, a story from a family member. Let me know in the comments below. Your stories matter. This community we're building here is for people who understand that the best parts of life are often hidden behind the heaviest doors.